The following program contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing.
If you'd like, leave a message at the beach, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. See ya.
Just want to call and say Happy New Year and let you know the time we spent together this summer was probably the best time I had last summer. Have a safe New Year, sweetheart. Bye.
It is next year already, Lori. This is Beth. Are you hungover or what? 1:30 in the afternoon. You should be up by now. Give me a call. See you.
Call me at work when you get a chance, but I just want to make sure you're okay. Just worried.
Approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the sheriff's office gets a call that they have a probable homicide at the Bay Point Apartments.
I was assigned to be the case agent. Went out there to Roosevelt at the apartment complex. Walked in and the TV was on.
Detective Patricia Jewell is led to the bedroom, where she finds a young woman's lifeless body.
She is on the floor at the end of the bed. She did have on a t-shirt. She also did have socks and tennis shoes on. There is a lot of blood all over her face, all over her upper torso, her hands, her arms. There's defense wounds that can be seen at this time.
The dead woman is 23-year-old Lori Colanino. She lived in this apartment alone.
Her pocketbook and her personal belongings were still there, were still intact. Robbery wasn't the motive.
To the police on the scene, sexual assault looks to be the lone motive.
There was semen found on her body. And basically that's, what we had to go on with the physical evidence that was collected from her body.
They did not find the murder weapon. Fingerprints, we got nothing on fingerprints.
The fact that she had been stabbed so viciously and so many times in the area of her heart made investigators think that this was something personal.
It did not require 16 stab wounds to her heart area to kill her. Somebody knew her, somebody wanted her, somebody killed her and got what they wanted.
Within minutes of Detective Jewell's examination of Lori's body, she has her first suspect. The man who called in the murder.
If I'm a homicide investigator on January 2nd, 1990, Scott Kelly's my #1 suspect right away.
Kelly, a bartender, worked with Lori in a local cocktail bar.
And he had told me him and Lori had been friends for several years. They were good friends.
And sometimes the two were even more.
It was just one of those, hey, when they had somebody else, they were still good friends. If they didn't have somebody else, then they became closer. Lori and Scott did have a verbal confrontation. It was, the holiday time, and he was going to go visit a old girlfriend. Lori was upset about that.
Scott reveals he was talking to Lori just before she was murdered.
She had called him around 1 o'clock. And he was still kind of in bed or half asleep. But then he said while they were talking all at once, she kind of gasped and screamed. The phone kind of went dead. He's telling me he's having a bad feeling about, this. So he tried calling her back, but no answer.
Scott claims he was concerned, so he rushed over.
Lori? Lori?
When he arrives,
Lori! Lori!
it's too late.
Oh, God! Oh, call 911! Lori! Oh, God.
And I'm listening and asking questions, and how he's answering. He is distraught. He is able, though, to answer all the questions, but at the same time, other things going through my mind. Okay, this could be a setup. Did he, do this?
One big question up front. Why is Scott covered in blood? His excuse? He gave Lori CPR. So what about the blood-spattered sink?
Scott told me that after he attempted to try to revive her, he went there and washed his hands in that kitchen sink.
Any homicide investigation, you're going to start with those who knew the victim best.
Okay, Scott, I need to go over the events on the day of the murder again with you.
Particularly in this case, with so much vicious violence.
Scott was a good suspect in all this. It would come down to that DNA testing to make sure.
Scott offers up a blood sample. With no other evidence linking him to his friend's murder, Pinellas County Police let him go. For now.
Back in 1990, when DNA analysis was being conducted, it took time, often 10 months to a year, to get results back.
Detectives continue to work the case and soon learn Scott Kelly wasn't the only man in Lori's life. She was outgoing and vivacious, attracting men in droves.
She worked as a cocktail waitress at a place called Penrod's Palace, which was a very popular nightclub, known for having attractive servers, and she certainly fit the bill. She also worked as an aerobics instructor.
Lori, very beautiful girl. She jogged in that complex. She laid out by the pool. She would turn any man's head.
Lori Colanino dated some men over the last couple of years that she had lived in Florida. And of course, the investigators are going to look at all of those previous relationships.
One man the cops are interested in questioning is Wayne LaFleur.
Wayne was an ex-boyfriend of quite a while ago, but he had been harassing her and kind of basically stalking her.
Hello.
She had had some vandalism committed to her car. The lug nuts had been loosened and there had been a dent on her quarter panel. She was getting strange phone calls in which someone would meow or hang up, and she suspected it was him.
I'm thinking, okay, I need to find Wayne.
Less than 24 hours after Lori's been killed, Detective Jewell is grilling her second suspect.
Wayne ended up contacting the Sheriff's Department and came in late that evening for an interview. We spoke with him. Of course, he denied doing this. Did question him on her complaints of damage to her vehicle.
Less than a year ago.
And telephone calls that were hang-ups and all that. He denied any knowledge of that, denied any involvement.
I didn't do anything. I was having...
Under pressure, he soon changes his tune. He admits he smashed up Lori's car because he was upset about the breakup. Has Wayne LaFleur graduated from petty vandalism to full-blown homicide?
As far as being the jilted lover and still, keeping track of her and following her around and damaging her vehicle and the telephone calls, he looks like a very good suspect for this.
Trouble is, He's got an alibi. He says he was at lunch with friends when Lori was killed. The police verify his alibi, but they still want to test his DNA.
Wayne did provide DNA as far as blood and any other, fluids that we needed.
This sample joins Scott Kelly's DNA in the long line at the lab. With 2 men in the frame for Lori's murder, the investigation is ramping up. Then detectives learn about a 3rd man in her complicated love life.
My first thoughts were, they're going to try to pin this on me. They're going to try to pin Lori's murder on me.
Pinellas County, Florida. A magnet for tourists in search of sand, sea, and winter sun.
It's got a small town feel to it. Older houses, big trees, and a leisurely pace.
The visitors are younger. The residents are older. I mean, a lot of people have retired to this area because the weather's ideal.
In the shadows, however, another Florida, transient and plagued by crime.
3 million people, perhaps, in the general area. We've got 1 million in Pinellas County. A place this large, we're going to get every crime known to man.
Hi, Lori, this is Thomas Powers. As soon as you get in, give me a call. It's pertaining to Thursday night. You working for Laura?
Murdered on the 2nd day of January 1990, Lori Colanino is one of several open homicide investigations for Pinellas County detectives.
Not too far away, we had another murder going on. Just prior to that, we also had a double homicide.
Stretched thin, cops fan out, looking for witnesses and suspects in the complex where Lori was killed. There's close to 400 apartments here.
The Bay Point apartments are 52 buildings, and each building has approximately 8 apartments within each building. So it was a very large task at hand to do a neighborhood canvass. There was a neighbor across the parking area that was working on his car that actually witnessed her coming home earlier in the day and going up to her apartment. However, that person did not see anybody else later on go into the house.
Their canvas is going nowhere. 24 hours after Lori's murder, investigators pick up the 3rd man in her life.
Okay, Eric, I need to know your exact whereabouts for the last 24 hours.
Cook and current boyfriend, Eric Held.
And they put me in the back of the car, and they start asking me if I knew a girl named Lori Colanino. I go, she's some kind of trouble or something? He goes, don't you read the newspaper, son? I said, no, I go, no, only if it's in the sports section, because everything else kind of depressing. He goes, she was killed. I said, whoa. I just sat back in the seat. Floored me. It was amazing. It just totally floored me. Yeah, I was scared. I was scared and I was upset. They made me take off my shirt, took pictures of me. It was very unnerving, to say the least. I was probably one of the last people to see her. We spent New Year's Eve together. I remember it snowed that night. The police asked me, where was my alibi? And I told them, I said, well, which I had to think about, but that afternoon, I went out jogging around noon. I stopped by my friend Sherry's house.
His alibi checks out. Eric is cleared by the police, but that doesn't clear his own conscience.
What if I was there? Maybe the guy wouldn't have came in. Maybe if I'd spent the night, maybe he never would have came in.
The autopsy reveals the full horror of Lori's last moments.
Lori Colanino was stabbed 16 times in the left side of the chest, in the heart.
On the right side, there was a stab in her neck, an entry and exit wound. And also there was the evidence that indicated a sperm that there was sexual battery. She did fight because she had defensive wounds and slash marks on her wrist and her fingers, so she did fight.
They didn't want her to come back. They wanted her dead.
Whoever wanted her dead is a complete mystery.
Everyone involved with talking about Lori loved her to death.
She's a huge Bon Jovi fan, I remember that. She was very fun, silly, hard worker, very hard worker.
I knew Lori wasn't going to be a cocktail waitress for the rest of her life, that's for sure.
She had actually just applied to paramedic school, so she had, a promising future helping people.
The whole thing's a tragedy. You have a 23-year-old person who has life to live for and was taken away by basically an animal.
4 days after the murder, Lori is buried by her family near her childhood home in Massachusetts.
I never really had any closure with it, to be honest with you. I never got to see her body, never saw her grave, never got to talk to any family members. I miss her very much. She was a good woman.
In the weeks after Lori's murder, investigators work through her circle of friends and colleagues.
Between the apartment complex and the employment places and friends and, there were a lot of people that I had to find, interview, verify their stories, or also take, samples if they agreed to.
Most of the homicides that we have are probably solved within 24 hours, because it is domestic or street crime scenario. Here she was, just a regular good citizen who's murdered in her home in the middle of the day in a brutal fashion, so kind of makes everybody wonder what's out there.
Weeks and then months go by with little progress. Every new lead comes up empty.
As they ruled out people, you had a feeling that maybe this isn't going to be solved.
5 months after Lori's murder, the police finally get the DNA results for their only strong suspects in the case. Stalker ex-boyfriend Wayne LaFleur and on and off again boyfriend Scott Kelly.
The DNA results eventually came back on Scott Kelly and Wayne LaFleur. And they showed through DNA analysis that they were not the perpetrators in killing Lori Colonino.
Scott cared very dearly for Lori. I can't even imagine his position in this. He was devastated.
Investigators have no one else on their radar.
More time was needed, more detective work to follow up and track down every male that lived in that complex. Due to caseloads and due to other investigations, homicides that we are assigned, it became a cold case.
Lori Colonino's case is shelved. Her family and friends are left stranded without answers.
When I left the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department, it was my one unsolved case.
The longer nobody ever was arrested for her murder, a lot of people did look my way, I suppose. I quit hanging out at some of the places I used to hang out. Things were a lot different,
2 years go by. Another heartbreak for the Colonino family. Lori's mother dies without knowing who killed her beloved daughter.
I always felt so bad that it was not solved prior. Lori's mother had died.
It eats at you. You can't put it to rest. It just sticks with you and sticks with you, and you want answers. You want justice. You want to know.
years and still no answers. Then, renewed hope. In 1994, the Pinellas Cold Case Unit reopens the Lori Colanino case. One of the lead detectives is James Beining.
There was a very good DNA profile, which would be able to be connected to a suspect if we could locate one.
All we needed was a name to put with it. A lot more difficult than it sounds. You can have all the DNA in the world, but if you don't have latent investigators beating on doors, doing basic police work, you're never going to solve the case.
The best place to start looking for suspects is at the Bay Point Apartments.
They had to really consider the possibility that some guy at the apartment complex had a thing for her.
The fact that it happened during the day, at that time of day, is very brazen. However, if it's a person who lives inside that complex, they wouldn't be noticed.
Lori was young and beautiful and liked to hang out at the Bay Point pool. Did someone there become obsessed with her? So obsessed they were driven to kill? Pinellas County, Florida, 1994. A cold case unit is reinvestigating the Lori Colanino rape and murder.
Lori Colanino case remained on the radar. It never went away.
We obviously know we have a male perpetrator because we have semen.
4 years earlier, officers worked the Bay Point Apartments for leads, coming up empty. Still, the cold case detectives are convinced the answer to the murder mystery lies here.
It's a sprawling complex. It's almost like its own little city.
And it's back to basics of homicide investigations, a neighborhood canvas.
This time, detectives are out for blood from every man in the complex.
To get a DNA sample from these people, and what I'm talking about at that time is a blood sample, which requires a needle into the arm, into the vein. You had to sell Lori to them. What a beautiful girl she was, life of the party, worked many jobs, gymnastics, the whole deal, because at that time, this was shortly after the O.J. Simpson trial. People did not trust DNA, they did not trust the police.
Luckily, a lot of people still live there. The ones that didn't, we tracked down. The ones that lived there, we beat on doors.
It takes over a month to persuade 170 men to give their blood. Only one male resident is left to test.
When we get to that apartment and knock on the door, there is no answer. We leave cards on the door. Never get an answer.
Weeks go by, and no response from whoever lives in that apartment.
We even taped cards, thinking, okay, they blew off the door. We taped them to the door, and this person would never call us. This raised some red flags immediately, and we began doing a background investigation on that subject.
That subject, they learn, is Brian Calzacorto. Originally from Pennsylvania, single, no children, a shoe salesman working just blocks away. Someone living here when Lori was killed.
His apartment is within eyeshot of Lori Colanino's apartment. If he stands in his living room and looks out the window, he has a direct view to her front door, about 100 yards away.
More red flags go up when detectives delve deeper into Calzacorto's background.
In 1986, his father, who was a 30-year police veteran, was shot to death with a service revolver in his home.
Alfred Calzacorto Sr. was found with a bullet in his head in his bedroom.
There was an investigation in Pennsylvania, and Brian Calzacorto was named as a suspect.
With a Pennsylvania cops on his tail, Calzacordo flees to Florida. His family closes ranks.
At one point, they took the Fifth Amendment 131 times. The impression that the authorities in Pennsylvania were getting was that Brian Calzacordo was the prime suspect and that the family was covering for him. Why? Nobody knows to this day, outside of the family, if indeed Brian did it.
That moves Brian Calzacordo to the top of the suspect pool at that time. We had nobody else that had any type of history like that. They came forward, and he's obviously avoiding a contact with us.
The shoe salesman has every reason to duck the police. They learn he's also wanted for credit card fraud.
He did not come back to that apartment again.
When Brian Calzacordo goes missing, he goes missing from everyone. He's not just missing from the police, he's missing from his family.
Then investigators catch a lucky break.
Detective Benny, my name is Alfred Calzacordo.
Someone calls from that apartment and says his brother is missing.
Write down. Thanks for calling.
Alfred Calzacordo has no idea his brother is a suspect in Lori's murder.
They talk to Alfred and immediately recognize what will become a very significant fact in this case.
To detectives, the two brothers look alike, an awful lot alike.
The people that we had contacted in Pennsylvania said they believed they were identical twins. Looking at their pictures, they resemble each other very close. And we knew it was a possibility, so our job gets a little tougher.
The DNA that is found in identical twins is exactly the same. They are the product of a single fertilized egg, and that single fertilized egg will divide in the uterus and then develop as two individual embryos, but both embryos have the exact same DNA.
Do you mind if we step in and have a look around?
Police want to test Brian Calzacordo's DNA against the semen found at the crime scene.
Thank you.
If Alfred and Brian are actually twins, the police can use Alfred's DNA to link Brian to Lori's murder.
Alfred says no. I will not give you a sample. This maybe makes some sense to investigators who have been researching the murder of the Calzacordo father in Pennsylvania and have noted that the family seemed to protect and perhaps cover up for Brian.
Exact date.
Suspects have the right not to talk to the police. They also have the right not to provide their blood or their other bodily fluids.
The cold case unit doesn't have any cause to hold Alfred. He's free to go. There's nothing they can do now except wait and hope that his brother turns up. Seven weeks later, he does.
Brian is arrested on Clearwater Beach. Basically, people are swimming in the water, and he's stealing money and stuff out of their purses from their towels on the beach.
So all of a sudden, they have their guy, and of course they're going to talk to him.
I was able to approach Brian Calzacordo in the Pinellas County Jail. Set up an interview with him.
I have no deals to make.
He claimed to be working that day and was nowhere in the complex at the time that it happened.
I have nothing I can tell you that apparently will help you.
I didn't believe him. He's trying to play the game. He's trying to be cool. But there's just something about Brian that says you need to stick with this guy. This guy knows more than he's saying. I explained to Brian is I can eliminate you from this case. That's my purpose here. And that would require a blood sample.
Brian refuses.
It doesn't mean he killed Lori. It just means he doesn't want to give his blood. He may have a valid reason for, that he doesn't want to. You could get a motion and an order from the judge to compel him to give blood, but we didn't have anything close to that. I mean, you can't base it on speculation or just say, hey, well, he's acting screwy, So there's nothing we could do at that point.
On top of this, detectives are derailed once again by their workload.
We have a serial killer that's killing prostitutes in Clearwater, and we are pulled to help working on that case. The Colanino case gets shelved again. It goes cold for a period of 5 years.
A heartbreaking turn of events for Lori's family and friends. With her killer on the loose, there's no closure.
Whenever there's a crime like that, you don't realize that you have that ripple effect. Everyone gets hurt in a way, shape, or form. She was gorgeous. I miss her very much.
The Lori Colanino case is cold, but not forgotten.
They were not going to give up. They assured us they would not give up on this until it was solved.
For the next 5 years, the police continue to keep tabs on their only serious suspect, the man who lived across from Lori in the Bay Point apartments.
Brian Calzacorda sets up an apartment in Tampa under his mother's name. He's going on his everyday, daily life, got a new job in Tampa, another shoe store, and he has no idea that we continue to look at him.
You gotta remember one thing. These cases can turn on the smallest detail. Things that come up later in an investigation can sometimes turn a major case and solve it.
A decade after her murder, investigators are still looking for that tiny detail to solve their mystery and put Lori's killer behind bars. If Lori Colanino was still alive, she'd be 33. Maybe a paramedic like she dreamed of. Maybe a mother with her own family. Pinellas County detectives believe the man who took her life 10 years earlier is Brian Calzacordo. New developments in forensic science offer another chance to solve the case.
Between 94 and 99, we'd had some advances in DNA technology as well. And so, you know, things were getting easier to do. You didn't have to take blood. You could get DNA from other items.
What the investigators did at that point was a pretty original and clever idea. Okay, so he won't give us his blood. We can't force him to do it. But there have been court rulings over the years that have said that once someone throws their trash away, it's public domain. The cops can go grab it, they can analyze it, they can do with it what they want, and they can use it in a court of law.
That's exactly what they do. Police set up a surveillance unit outside Brian Calzacordo's apartment. And wait. For 6 nights, nothing. Then, finally, Brian walks out holding a bag of garbage. The final puzzle piece may be inside this plastic bag.
We dump the trash out on some table, going through in it, and bingo, we find what we're looking for. We find items that will potentially have DNA evidence on them.
In the trash, the screen from an electric razor.
Razors particularly are very good sources of DNA. Just the process of shaving, you do remove a lot of skin cells from your face, and those skin cells are a very good source of DNA.
Forensic scientists build a DNA profile from Brian Calzacordo's razor screen. The results come back. It's an exact match to the killer's DNA found at the crime scene. But the police can't arrest him just yet.
After I was able to get a DNA profile, the detective said, well, he does have a brother, and they look a lot alike. There's a possibility that they're twins. Would they have the same DNA? And I explained that if they were identical twins, that yes, they would have the same DNA. However, if they were fraternal twins, they would not.
To confirm that Brian's brother, Alfred, is an identical twin, the detective set up another trash pull.
It worked once, there's a chance it's going to work again, and we will be able to get a profile from Alfred's trash.
Items from Alfred's garbage are sent to the lab. His DNA is exactly the same as Brian's DNA. A huge headache for investigators and virtually unprecedented in American criminal history.
The twin scenario is a very unique situation because at that point, the technology that you have at your disposal is really not able to answer the final question, who in fact could have left the semen stain that was found on her body and subsequently be the suspect or the perpetrator of that crime.
One of those two guys did. One of those two guys is a psychotic murderer, okay? Now the question is, how are you going to pick which one? Or how are you going to prosecute successfully which one? So then we had to start doing a lot of background work to essentially try to establish an alibi for Alfred, because we felt pretty confident based upon all the other circumstances that Brian was the party.
The killer question: where was Alfred at about 1 in the afternoon on January 2nd, 1990?
Alfred worked in Tampa in a structured environment. He had a security clearance. He had just started working at the location.
Investigators tracked down Alfred's former supervisor.
How well do you know Alfred?
I liked him a lot. Al was polite, respectful, cheerful, and as an employee, just an employer's dream almost.
I mean, there's no way. He's one of the nicest people I really
Despite the passage of time, Schindewolf is certain Alfred was at work on the day Lori was killed.
Al was a fairly new employee, and I was fairly new in my position. I was trying to make sure that everything was done properly. So I do remember I could only give so many people the time off, and Al was new. And I couldn't grant, he didn't even ask for any time off, but had he asked for it, he would have been denied.
Oh, he never, once he got there in the morning, he didn't leave all day.
Even if Alfred had taken lunch that day, the window for murder is too tight.
There is no way on a lunch hour that someone could take their hour lunch, drive to Clearwater, do something like that, and be back here on time for work.
You would have missed that day?
Absolutely not.
Well, we were confident at that point that Alfred was not in Pinellas County at that time, that he was at work in Hillsborough County.
11 years after Lori Colanino's murder, Pinellas County detectives make their move against the Calzacordo twins.
Both of these guys were approached at the exact same time. So no phone calls and no communication could be done between the two of them.
Brian Calzacordo is arrested for murder. Alfred Calzacordo is subpoenaed for questioning.
I just need to have him saying from his mouth, I didn't do it. Because once we have him saying, I didn't do it, I had other circumstances to prove Brian did.
You've never seen her?
No.
You've never been to her apartment?
No.
Did you kill her?
No.
Do you know anything about that homicide whatsoever?
No, I don't.
Nothing that can help us in our investigation?
No.
He didn't really have the reaction you would expect of someone who knew nothing about it. It's always been my belief that he suspected something was up.
When your brother was missing, I think they asked maybe for a blood sample or something from you, and you didn't want to do that?
Correct.
Why was that?
Well, being identical twins, I know that we have the same DNA. And I actually, a family attorney up north advised we shouldn't do that because you guys can link me to anything down here.
Well, how link you to what?
Anything. I don't know.
Well, have you done something to be linked to?
No. I mean, look at OJ. I mean, who knows?
The police have what they need.
I was at work.
Alfred says he's innocent, and his former boss insists he was at work that day. One twin is free to go home. The other sits in jail, waiting for his trial.
Right. Here's Mommy again. Okay.
Mrs. Calzacordo visits the man suspected of killing her husband and charged with killing Lori. her very own son.
Well, you call any time, you hear?
Yeah, I will.
Okay, you don't have to wait. I mean, just to talk, all right?
Yeah.
Hey, I can see your eyes. Look up. There you go.
Oh, you look up.
Yeah. Oh, I was leaning forward.
I would say he was very pleasant to work with, a very well-mannered, I call him a kid. He struck me as a kid and sincere.
You've been eating okay? I mean, good meals or?
Yeah, it's monotonous. But
regular food then, huh?
Yeah.
Can you buy stuff?
I can buy food, but it's just like...
It's time to put it to a jury, and let's take Brian Calzacorta to court for the murder of Lori Colonino.
Will Alfred stick to his story?
I did not.
Will the brothers work together to wreck the prosecution's case so Brian can once again escape justice?
You look good. Good, so hang in there, all right?
Yeah.
2 years after his arrest, former shoe salesman Brian Calzacorta stands trial for the murder of Lori Colonino.
Get me that attorney, that's all I'm worried about.
Okay, we'll get it. Don't
Okay.
worry. I know we're all working on it. Lorraine and Janice and Alfred and me, so we'll get that for you.
Okay.
Twin brothers face off against each other in a brutal murder trial. Both claim they are innocent, and DNA doesn't help. Identical twins have exactly the same genetic signature.
This very surreal scene was playing out where you have two guys that look almost exactly alike. One at the defense table, one at the witness stand, and the defense lawyer essentially grilling Alfred about whether he killed Lori Colonino, essentially accusing him of it. Now, Alfred, I'll say, kind of held his own. He didn't show much emotion, was very sort of stoic about it. But the other thing that you have to sort of wonder is, this family's history. How willing of a participant in this whole let's blame the brother thing was Alfred?
Even though he was an identical twin of Al, I could have picked the two of them out. Al had a kinder look to his face. Brian was very cold. Just the eyes, like emotionless. And Al was always smiling, his eyes smiled with him. He smiled. So the impression I got from Brian is that he and Al may be identical twins, but to me, they sure don't look alike.
Both brothers testified, and they were pitted one against the other.
The defense's take was that there's enough doubt here. There's a guy with the exact same DNA who lives not that far away.
The prosecution takes the jury through what they believe happened to Lori in her last moments. On January 2nd, 1990, Lori returns from the gym. Living across from her, Brian Calzacorta watches Lori walk in and leave her front door open so her cats can come and go. He's watched her do this many times before. Lori calls her friend, Scott Kelly.
And a footprint, he's such a freak show.
That's when Brian walks in, forcing her to get off the phone.
I'll call you back.
Lori, if you're there, pick up.
Come on, pick up.
Scott Kelly had called her back, and he couldn't get through. He was getting her answering machine. And, of course, he thought that was unusual because he was just on the phone with her. So he kept calling over a few minutes. And she finally answered.
Lori, hey!
With Brian there,
Yeah, I'll call you back. I'm fine. I'll call
Lori
you back.
tells Scott she's okay.
Okay, do you want me to come over or something?
After she hangs up, Brian attacks, stabs her 16 times in the heart, and at some point, sexually assaults her. Then he goes back to selling shoes. The defense argues that Alfred Calzacorto, working 30 minutes away in Tampa, could have killed Lori on his lunch break.
This was a unique case because the brothers lived so proximate to each other. So either had the opportunity to do the crime, and the DNA said it was one or the other. And in the end, it came down to work record and a recollection of the work record by Alfred's boss being positive that Alfred never missed work.
The jury got the case. They deliberated for 5 hours. It was not a difficult deliberation.
The verdict? Guilty. Brian Calzacorto is sentenced to life in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 25 years.
Brian Calzacorto would maintain his innocence today, I'm sure.
13 years after Lori Colanino's murder, justice is served.
Kudos to the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office for sticking with him. God bless those guys, because I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for their persistence, I don't think he ever would have got caught. They took a piece of me too with him, you know, and all her family.
Every time I ride by the entrance to her complex, which happens almost on a weekly basis, I think of Lori.
I miss her. I would like to see her now. Say goodbye to her. I never got a chance to say goodbye, which I do regret, but there's nothing I can do about it.
Lori's still gone, you know, so I'll always remember her. I'll remember the good things, you know, but she had a horrific ending, so is there closure? I don't know.